In the sweltering heat of the Egyptian desert, somewhere between Memphis and the cataracts of the Nile, a massive Persian army simply vanished. 50,000 soldiers, according to ancient accounts, marched into the western sands to conquer the oracle of Ammon and were never seen again. Their commander, Cambyses II of Persia, waited in vain for their return while his grip on reality and his newly conquered Egyptian empire began to slip away. This mysterious disappearance, whether real or imagined, became the centerpiece of one of history's most enduring legends. The story of a great conqueror driven mad by his own ambitions. Yet behind the sensational tales of divine retribution and royal insanity lies a far more complex figure. A methodical administrator and military strategist whose brief but transformative reign fundamentally altered the balance of power in the ancient world. Cambyses II ascended to the Persian throne in 530 BC under circumstances that would have tested any ruler. His father, Cyrus the Great, had died campaigning against the Massagetæ in Central Asia, leaving his son to inherit not just the crown, but the enormous responsibility of governing the largest empire the world had ever seen. Cambyses had served as governor of northern Babylonia under his father Cyrus, gaining crucial administrative experience in one of the empire's most important provinces. This apprenticeship in governance, often overlooked in dramatic retellings of his reign, reveals a ruler who was carefully prepared for power. The Persian Empire that Cambyses inherited was a marvel of administrative efficiency and cultural tolerance. Unlike the brutal conquest states of Assyria or Babylon, the Achaemenid system relied on local collaboration and respect for indigenous traditions. This approach had enabled Cyrus to build an empire stretching from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea with relatively little resistance. But it also created enormous challenges for his successors, who had to maintain control over dozens of distinct peoples, languages, and religions, while projecting power across vast distances. Cambyses understood that the empire's continued expansion was not optional. In a world where military success determined political legitimacy, standing still meant eventual collapse. The conquest of Egypt in 525 BC represents perhaps the most sophisticated military campaign of the ancient world, yet it is rarely analysed with the attention it deserves. Cambyses crossed the Sinai Desert with the help of Arab tribes who supplied his armies with water, and at Pelusium he inflicted a heavy defeat on the forces of King Psammetichus III of Egypt. This campaign required not just military might, but extraordinary logistical planning and diplomatic finesse. The Persian king had to negotiate water rights with Bedouin tribes and manage Greek mercenaries fighting on both sides, while navigating the complex politics of Egyptian religious establishments. The fact that he succeeded where so many other ancient conquerors had failed demonstrates strategic abilities that go far beyond the mad tyrant of Greek propaganda. What makes Cambyses' Egyptian campaign particularly remarkable is how thoroughly he adapted to local customs and expectations. Contemporary Egyptian records, largely ignored by Greek historians, show a ruler who carefully cultivated the support of native priests and adopted traditional pharaonic titles and ceremonies. He was crowned according to ancient Egyptian rituals and took care to present himself as the legitimate heir to the pharaohs rather than a foreign conqueror. This cultural sensitivity contradicts the later Greek narrative of a king who desecrated temples and murdered sacred animals in fits of impious rage. The famous story of his madness, popularized by Herodotus, must be understood within the context of Greek political needs rather than historical accuracy. Writing a century after the events, Herodotus had compelling reasons to portray Persian kings as unstable tyrants driven to excess by their unlimited power. This narrative served both to explain Persian military failures and to contrast Persian despotism with Greek ideals of moderation and self-control. Yet the historical Cambyses was dealing with genuine challenges that would have tested any ruler's sanity. The logistical demands of governing an empire spanning 3 continents, the constant threat of revolt in distant provinces, and the enormous financial costs of maintaining vast armies created pressures unknown to smaller kingdoms. Modern archaeological evidence suggests that rather than mindless destructiveness, Cambyses' actions in Egypt reflected calculated responses to specific political and religious challenges. The killing of the sacred Apis bull, if it occurred at all, may have been a strategic decision to break the power of priests who opposed Persian rule rather than the act of a madman. As Pierre Bryant observes, Cambyses' conquests must not be seen as a more or less irrational and uncontrollable desire to take over the entire inhabited world. Instead, they represented the logical continuation of his father's grand strategy to unify the civilized world under Persian hegemony. The failed expedition to Ethiopia and the mysterious disappearance of the army sent against the Ammonium Oracle may have been overly ambitious, but they were consistent with a rational policy of securing Egypt's southern and western frontiers against potential threats. The institutional innovations of Cambyses' reign are often overshadowed by the dramatic stories of his supposed madness, yet they had lasting historical significance. His establishment of the Persian postal system, the famous Royal Road Network that enabled rapid communication across the empire, and the standardization of weights, measures, and coinage created the infrastructure that would sustain Persian power for 2 centuries. These achievements required the kind of systematic thinking and long-term planning that contradicts the image of an impulsive tyrant. The circumstances of his death in 522 BC remain as mysterious as much of his reign. Official Persian records claimed he died of natural causes while returning from Egypt to deal with a rebellion led by a pretender claiming to be his murdered brother Bardia. But Greek sources, always eager to find divine justice in Persian misfortunes, insisted he died from a self-inflicted wound that became infected. A fitting end, they suggested, for a king who had blasphemed against the gods. The truth, as with so much of Cambyses' story, lies buried beneath layers of political propaganda and cultural misunderstanding. What emerges from serious historical analysis, however, is a portrait of a ruler caught between the impossible demands of governing a vast empire and the limitations of ancient communication and transportation. Cambyses faced challenges that would not be successfully resolved until the Roman Empire developed more sophisticated administrative systems centuries later. His failures were less the result of personal madness than of structural problems inherent in governing pre-modern empires across such vast distances and diverse populations. His legacy extends far beyond his brief 8-year reign. His conquest of Egypt brought the Persian Empire to its greatest territorial extent and demonstrated that even the most ancient and culturally distinct civilizations could be successfully incorporated into the Achaemenid system. His administrative innovations provided the foundation for the later achievements of Darius I, who is often credited with organizing the Persian Empire, but was actually building on systems established by his predecessor. Modern scholarship increasingly recognizes that the traditional Greek narrative of Cambyses as a mad tyrant tells us more about Greek attitudes toward Persian power than about the historical reality of his reign. The king who emerges from contemporary Persian and Egyptian sources is a complex figure, ambitious certainly, perhaps ruthless when circumstances demanded, but fundamentally rational in his approach to the enormous challenges of governing the ancient world's greatest empire. His story serves as a reminder that history is often written by the enemies of the powerful, and that the truth about controversial figures like Cambyses can only be recovered through careful analysis of multiple sources and archaeological evidence, rather than reliance on dramatic narratives designed to serve the political needs of later generations.